So it's safe to say that when the new regulations of Formula One came about in 2022, there was a lot of expectation that you'd see much closer racing, wheel-to-wheel action constantly. And yeah, I get that that's something that may or may not happen in close time, but I think 2023 feels more like 2014, 15 and 16 than it does a bright new future. And if you're wondering what 2014, 15 and 16 was, it was one team domination at its finest. Although this time it's just one driver in one team, which really makes it worse when you think about it.
And I think 14, 15, 16.
You at least had a title fight.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Mercedes was way ahead
of the
grid, of course. The domination and all of that kept aside, there weren't other things, kind of glooming over the season. This time it just feels much worse. I'm sorry, but I'm going to say this season in my life is one of the worst I've ever seen.
And I'm telling you, the reason, at least for me, was because at least back then you had Rosberg and Hamilton who were competing against each other. Here, Max is in a league of his own, and Checo, for whatever said and done, just can't seem to catch him at all. There's just no competition. It's one way. It's in fact as one way as what maybe 2020 was for Hamilton. Probably the only year he really romped to the title, contrary to popular belief. Because at least other seasons there were competition. Here, no competition. 2020 and 2023 for Max Verstappen, there's nothing. But we said that rather than actually just look at the doom and gloom of things, because we like analyzing things, what exactly has made things this bad so early on? And perhaps more importantly, a question we'll answer in the end, is this an indictment of the new regulations already? But before we get to that, let's talk about what we think, and we came up with the 4 points. You can again let us know in the comments what you think those 4 points are, right, wrong, whatever. We came up with 4 key points really, which we felt were, making this season a bit of a chore to watch, in our opinion. What was the first point again?
The Red Bull domination, of course.
I mean, yeah. That is definitely something that unfortunately has, you were just coming off, and again, everyone knows this. If you guys have watched these videos long enough, you know where my allegiances lay. Been a Mercedes fan, but was really happy when 2021 came about, because at least you were getting a fight.
Yes.
It made things exciting rather than romping to one title after another. It just made the sport boring to watch, because you knew more often than not who was going to win. And you're thinking, okay, Red Bull finally reached that level. Maybe now you're going to see battles. Maybe a Ferrari gets in, he gets its act together. And you have seen teams rise up, but just Red Bull are so far ahead of the curve at this point that it's making everyone else seem redundant.
Yeah, and like you said, you brought up a really good point, and I've been thinking about it as well. With Mercedes dominance, there were 2 cars ahead of the grid, right? With the Red Bull dominance, Max is leading the race, and then Checo's nowhere to be found. I think that's what makes it worse, because it's just not one car, it's one car plus one driver, right? And then when you look at the rest of the grid, the competition is just too close.
Exactly. Right now, if you're looking at it, if you eliminate, and this is a fantasy thing, but if you take away Red Bull from the F1 right now, then you have a next level tight race. Because then it's between 3 teams in Aston Martin, Ferrari and Mercedes, not necessarily in this order, who are all competing. But they're just so close. If you go back to 2021, arguably the last time we had a real competitive through the season title fight, it ebbed and flowed between Mercedes and Red Bull, and you were having a proper fight. So it was genuinely unpredictable. It made the races worth tuning into.
Exactly. And now it's just a hodgepodge of a race, because, by the way, this concludes the point of the Red Bull domination, is I've been seeing a lot of videos going around, making rounds of social media, which are from fans who are gone to watch the race, and they have these videos of the track, or let's say the cars passing by, and the Red Bull passes by 1 second, 2 seconds, and then the rest of the grid passes by. But it means indicating how big of a difference there is between Max's Red Bull and the rest of the grid.
But okay, see, now playing counter-production, or playing, let's say, devil's advocate to Red Bull, and this is something I would tell people as well during the era of Mercedes dominance, that you can't blame Mercedes for being dominant. You have to blame the other teams for not stepping up to the plate. This era, Red Bull, to their immense credit, have absolutely knocked it out of the park. And every other team is playing catch-up at this point. Which means that, and this has been something that's very true for really throughout the history of F1, when you've had these regulation changes, one team kind of aces it better than the others, then the rest of them are playing catch-up. And how is it that the other teams are going to play catch-up? That brings us to, I think, the second point, which was that, what was the second point?
The tires overheating.
Oh yeah, see, that's another thing. Remember, this year's regulations, not just the aerodynamics, one key thing was meant to be the tires. And I think we're seeing a duopoly or a dual problem, which you wouldn't normally see. Certain people are complaining that the tires are overheating too quickly. Yet on the other hand, you're seeing a lot of one-stop races, which means that is it really just down to tire deg? What is the new tires? I mean, you know, a lot of drivers have pushed for tires where you don't really see too much deg. And I think this is where the balance is not being struck right by Pirelli, is that you want tires that don't degrade too quickly, which you can push harder on, but they're able to preserve and run long, but not necessarily push all the time.
Right, and when the 2022 regulations came in and the specifications and all of that, Pirelli also upgraded their tires.
They want the tire size to 18-inch rims and everything.
And what happened after that, and to sum it up in basic words, is that the tires are overheating, but they are not degrading, which makes it harder to, you know, make decisions on whether to pit or whether to not pit or what tires to use, because you see they're overheating, they're causing a lot of problem with the cars, but they're not degrading enough, which is making it harder for
teams to make those assessments. Absolutely. In fact, if I remember correctly, we were watching Spain. You know, both Mercedes cars who were running up front looked the most comfortable on the softs, which shouldn't happen. The softs are meant to degrade quicker. That is pretty much the whole point of them being soft compounds. Yes, you'll get a few quick laps, but then it'll start eating away. But they were pushing hard. In fact, they managed to keep Sergio Perez at bay, mainly because they were on the softs while he was on the hards, and he was just not able to match their pace. So these new Pirelli tires, I don't know, they are, in fact, you know, there's a lot of talk about, in fact, this is something we can also debate on. There's rumors coming that maybe, just maybe, when the next tire tender comes about, Bridgestone might look to enter the fray again. Now, that's another, as I said, why I'm saying it's another debate. Do you want a new manufacturer, tire manufacturer? Do you want to bring back the era of the tire wars?
Oh my gosh, MotoGP uses Bridgestone. No, it's Michelin.
They use Michelins. In fact, F1 too, in that time used to use Michelins, then Goodyears. As I said, that's a debate for another time. It just struck me. But for now, yes, definitely, very, very interesting one. But right now, those Pirelli tires are a mystery to everyone. Because you're seeing drivers able to drive longer, but not able to necessarily push harder, and that's a major problem. Third, and this is where things might just get a little bit technical, I think now the regulations, or as the regulations, the way they were intended to be, teams are starting to find ways around it.
Yes.
I think they are now.
Yeah. And I think that concludes that one.
No, I think I can give an explanation in as dumb a way as possible if I try. I mean, so see, usually what was the major problem with cars pre-2022? You'd have the phenomena of dirty air, which means air that was disrupting the aerodynamics of the car behind. Now, what the FIA tried to do with these new regulations was to eliminate dirty air, which they largely did succeed to a degree. But the problem is that creating that dirty air, the tricks that go into it, it's actually really beneficial for the car. Maybe not the car behind, but the car who's in front. So a lot of teams are now figuring out ways to do that. And that's why you're seeing dirty air return. It's harder to follow. What was the big complaint we always had? It's impossible to follow. You're seeing that again. And in fact, that brings us to our next point, because if I'm not wrong, the next point is about the DRS zones. You're seeing problems.
DRS zones, and I think I was keeping this for the last, but since we've talked about it, never mind that.
Cool, okay.
So there's another point coming after that. So the third one is the shortened DRS zones, which are just making racing that much more impossible.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be fair. I'm not a fan of DRS, not in its entirety.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you know why?
Like
no, I like it, but I think more so than anything else, and I've seen racing from certain eras where you could overtake without necessarily needing that assistance, where it was down to skill as much as anything else. But you're not really seeing that nowadays. So DRS is a necessary evil. However, now you're shortening those zones. And in fact, if you go back, the one place where it was impacting the most was Baku. You remember any car, in fact, the Red Bulls with that straight line speed were just sailing past everyone else. Remember how lonely Charles Leclerc was?
Exactly.
And that is ruining the racing.
I know, but with we're seeing a lot more domination now. These days, the past few years, Mercedes and now Red Bull, and that's the DRS zones were brought in for a reason, is to give a fair competition to all the other teams in the back of the grid, in the middle of the grid, or whatever. But when you do that, when you shut down the most important part of racing, which is the DRS zone, which helps you, overtake those, take those gaps, go for those gaps. It just makes racing that much more boring. Come on.
Yeah, and see, let's face facts. No one likes easy overtakes, but the reason you brought in DRS because there was at one point where overtakes would only be happening in the pits. No one enjoys watching that. I'm sorry. The fact of the matter is, there might be certain fans who enjoy the entirety of, let's say, the strategic part of it, but that can't be the only thing you're watching for. Fans want overtakes, they want on track. Yeah, you want on track action. Otherwise, what's the point? Race and simulators then.
Yeah.
So, DRS zones being shortened, I think you were hoping, or the FI were hoping, that you'd reach a point where you might not need DRS, but I think they jumped the gun a little bit in that regard.
Yeah, and which brings us to our fourth point and the most final point of ours on why overtaking is much more difficult now is because we've got bigger cars.
Yeah.
And those bigger cars, since they are not agile, they are not nimble, they are not made to overtake that easily, and since especially on tracks like Monaco and street circuits or with smaller straights, you don't have space to overtake with that big of cars.
Exactly. In fact, I remember when the Monaco Grand Prix came about, there was some graphics doing the rounds about the width of F1 cars back in the day. When I say back in the day, I mean in the 50s when the championship was starting.
Smaller.
It was half the size in terms of width of the current cars. And obviously, I know, look, the counter arguments that one is those cars were not safe at all. Two, F1 now is very downforce driven, which is the reason why the car lengths have widened. It's because the wider the car is, the better the downforce you're able to generate from the floor. That is the key.
Also the floor lifted.
Yeah, the floor lifting, and of course now with with ground effect cars, the underfloor, as we've learned, is so important. Yeah. So the key is there in modern day F1, anyone can make a car that's fast and straight.
Exactly.
What is the differentiating factor? Downforce, how quick you are through the corners, and the more downforce you're able to generate, the smoother your drive is going to be. But in that quest for downforce, you've ended up widening the car so much. In fact, I think for me, the best F1 cars that I'm talking about in terms of look of the width of the car was in like the early to mid 2000s, where the car lengths were kind of not that, they were narrower.
With the rounded noses, right?
Yes, yes.
Era,
those were much more, I mean, they were easier on the eye. You had more side-by-side racing. Mind you, even then though, they would struggle on tracks like Monaco. Monaco's been a problem forever at this point in terms of like the spectacle of the race. Spectacle overall is gorgeous. Who doesn't love watching Monaco?
If you have money, yes.
Yeah, or you can watch it on TV like us. But either which way, I think, the width of the cars, and that's something and also the, nowadays you have to remember F1 cars are carrying a lot more. The power units, which are there. You have two components besides the internal combustion engine. You have MGUH, MGUK. MGUH will of course be dropped eventually, come 2026. But that power unit is very heavy, and not just that, you have safety devices on as well. The halo is not something that's light. Additional safety which you made around the cockpit has made the cars heavier. So the FIA actually do recognize that. To their credit, for the next set of regulations 26, one of the things they're trying to get lighter cars. But again, you need to lighten it significantly to make the cars more nimble and agile. That is the major problem.
And the thing is, the 2022 specifications made the cars much smaller than the upgrade before, but when you look at the
it's
compare
so bulky.
When you look at the overall like in the history of F1, if you look at the overall comparison of the cars, this is the biggest one.
And the heaviest, because if I remember correctly, in 2022, when the regulations first came about, there was only one team, that was Alfa Romeo, who managed to make a car within the prescribed weight limit. Every other team struggled to get it under.
Because they didn't have enough,
But that car was really good in the early parts of 2022. Bottas and Zhu were getting some good results. Unfortunately, after that, it just kind of fell off the cliff. But then that's Valtteri Bottas for you. I watched him enough to say that. Anyway, the thing is, again, weight is a problem, and the heaviness of those cars, the fact that they're not very easy to drive. And sometimes nowadays in modern F1, you'll see the broadcast, they show you the inside the cockpit cam. Man, some of those guys are absolutely at it on the steering wheel, which tells you that the drivability of the cars probably isn't really at its peak right now. You don't see the Red Bull struggle, but the other teams, it's not just the porpoising which was a problem. The steering wheel, they'll be everywhere. And so, drivability of the cars, that's something also which needs to be fixed. But again, if we're being devil's advocates, and we'll go to you first and then I'll give a bit of a closing note. Is it too early for us to even be making this judgment into these regulations? Are we being harsh?
Maybe, but then when you look at this season,
this season has been underwhelming. That's the thing. But I think you'd have to give them maybe 3 or 4 seasons before you can comprehensively state that this has been a bad, overall. Like, I really like the direction they were going in 2022. You had some competitive races. In fact, because the teams are still trying to figure things out, there were a few variables thrown in there as well. But I think if you really want to talk about raceability and stuff like that, you have to wait 3-4 seasons before you can make a judgment. But there's definitely things that need fixing.
Absolutely.
And if the FIA needs help, we've done this lovely video. Please check it out. And if you guys enjoyed it, well, you know what you can do. Like, share, subscribe, tap the bell. Also leave us a comment and let us know what you have liked and hated about this season. Also follow us across social media and download what?
The AajTak app.
There we go. And also check out some other videos that we've done, because we do plenty of stuff for you guys enjoyment. For now though, from Gargi and me, it is goodbye.
Goodbye.